feeling tired all the time isn't normal. It's profitable.
We're surrounded by addictively engineered foods and a system of treatments instead of cures.
However, your energy is one of the most controllable things in your life. And once you understand what your body actually needs, your life changes.
This episode, we're breaking down Good Energy by Casey Means. I'm Robert.
I'm Asher, and this is Learning to Live.
So why do you feel awful all the time?
Great question. Let me start by naming them. Domino's, Bojangles, Cookout. The list goes on.
Right.
And according to the book we're about to get into, it's pretty much all the fault of the food that we're eating. Mm-hmm. But this is kicking off like a real deep dive into diet for us, which is a really exciting but interesting field and a very opinionated field.
Yeah, that's for sure.
So let's start by just like, why are we doing this now? But what approach mainly are we going to take to this? Because there's some strong preferences in how to go about this that exist.
Yeah. So we just finished our deep dive into the kind of the mindscape and the mental side of things. And now we want to pull it a little bit into the physical side because we're like, okay, we've got our practice there. We kind of know a guideline of what we're going to be doing. So we still feel that there's room to grow in just how we exist, especially physically. So diet is a huge part of that. A, that's I think why we want to get into it now. Now B, how do we want to go about this? I think what I like the most with the mental side of things is that we didn't come with like a how to specifically fix this one little problem, how to put a Band-Aid on this mental thing that you're dealing with. Instead, it was like here's kind of a root fundamental way to change the way that you look at this. So we're kind of going through the same thing with our diet here, where it's like, what is really the fundamental thing that we're getting at that we want to improve on? Which is why I think this book is going to be great to get into, because it kind of comes at it from a scientific lens of here's the fundamental baseline of what you need to think about when you think about diet. It's not like go vegan, go into this diet, go keto. It's like, it's not about that.
Yeah.
It's about what do our bodies want and how do we give it to them?
Yeah. And there's a million different diets out there. Like you were mentioning, there's keto, paleo, carnivore, vegan, vegetarian. Like there, you could go.
You want to name some more maybe?
Yeah. Let me see how many I could name in like a minute. People feel really strongly about their diet, and this is not going to be this is right and this is wrong. We're purely interested in what will make us feel the best.
Right.
And how can we get to that answer from a scientific approach? And the other thing, like you said, is like we're trying to ground this podcast in reaching fulfillment, but we recognize the deep importance of the building blocks, the fundamentals to how we feel on a day-to-day. And, you know, something that we learn in this book is that 90% of serotonin, which is deeply tied to fulfillment, is produced in the gut. So there's like this big relationship between what we're putting in our bodies and then the thoughts we're thinking and the mood we're feeling. So we feel like, yes, it's not the spiritual topic that we just came from of meditation and mindfulness. And so maybe it doesn't at first come across as
how is diet fulfilling?
Right.
Or whatever.
Exactly. But it's massive into how we feel, into how we reach that goal. So we feel like it's just a really important topic to get the most out of life. But just in our personal experience, I think we've both had moments, especially in college, and still for me recently, where I know I'm not at peak performance. I woke up the other day and I was feeling tired and I was in a bad mood. And I just had this thought that popped up, which is like, I think most of my happiness and most of my good days are when I'm just feeling energized.
Right.
And I was just like, I just want to feel energized. And when I'm driving to work or something and music is playing and I like just have a burst of energy, I'm just happier.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, this is what a lot of Michael Singer's infinite energy that you can tap into is. But I mean, you can have infinite energy all day, but if you don't sleep for a week, you're probably going to die. So if we look at what our body really needs and to supply it with that, there's clearly a deficiency. And I totally sympathize with your energy thing here because I remember I would journal fairly consistently over the course of the last couple of years. And it was this kind of like guided journal where like one of the sections in the day was like at the beginning, how do I want to feel? I probably wrote down energetic like 80% of the days.
Yeah.
because there's clearly, I was waking up feeling very tired. I would be falling asleep during the day. And I would say I struggle with sleep, but I get like on average, probably 7.5 hours of kind of interrupted. Like there's definitely work to be done there, which we'll get to much later.
Yeah.
But just, I know that other people have gotten more or less sleep or similar sleep to me and have had way more energy. So I'm like, is there something diet related to this?
Right.
I don't know. Probably.
Yeah. And it goes back to like when you're feeling lethargic, when you're feeling tired, it's just like so impactful on your day. And I think, you know, we talk about this for ourselves. We're relatively healthy people.
Yeah.
And yet still I can go weeks at a time where I know I'm not at my peak energy. And then if you broaden that to the US in general, it's like clearly there's a health crisis. And clearly, I mean, I think the stats are 40% of Americans are obese, 70% of Americans are overweight. And that's by like the basic definitions of obesity. She talks in the book of like 60% of kids' calories are from ultra processed foods. And we'll get into what that looks like. But this is not some monumental shift that happened in the past 40 years where everyone in the United States just got hungrier and or less
has bad habits
or
now
bad habits. It's like clearly there's been a massive environmental shift fueled by fast food companies and
just our environments, what's around us,
and what's around us,
cheapest, what's 100%. Easiest.
And you think about how that would probably bubble up, and maybe that's a good time to start getting into why we chose Good Energy as a book and the core idea. So maybe why did we choose Good Energy?
I would say this book was very intriguing because it has a very holistic approach to health. It says most of all chronic issues can be boiled down to that we are not giving ourselves what they need. And that's the kind of the core thesis of the book, is that we need to have good energy, not bad energy. Now we'll get into what that really means in a second, but other key points of the book, it gets a lot into kind of misconceptions in the medical field and just with the healthcare system and kind of looking at what's around us differently. We have so much trust in, you know, our doctors, in our like restaurants and all of these, and even grocery stores. You know, you expect to go to like a place like Whole Foods and you're like, oh, I'm eating healthy. Maybe not. You know, maybe there's still a lot of problems there. So we have this huge level of trust in industries that are do not have our best interest in mind. So so the book comes out like let's look at the core root of most problems that we face health-wise. Let's figure out how we change the way that we look at our environment. And then what do we do with that? You know, how do we go about actually being healthy?
Yeah. And it's grounded in science, and it's very, here's what to do about it, which is, I think, appealing to both of us, because this podcast, we're supposed to be learning what do we actually do about it. Now, I will say it's probably a good time for a disclaimer. Like, we will be referencing things that the book says that are referencing studies. We didn't do, like, we're referencing the book. We didn't do a ton of digging on every fact that she lists off.
Yeah.
So, you know, take that for what you will. But
we're also not doctors. So we're stepping into a field here.
Yes.
And we're just going to use our resources and make do with what we have.
We're just, at the end of the day, we're just trying to like eat the best we can.
Right.
Yeah. And we're probably going to get some things wrong on that journey, but like that's the goal.
Right.
So getting into Good Energy itself. So Casey Means is a doctor. She went to Stanford. She was a really successful student. And then I believe it was head and neck surgery that she was going to for residency.
Yeah, she was specializing in it.
She was specializing in that. And her experience was that her patients weren't getting better. They were just treating symptoms. And they would keep coming back, and they were living really difficult, challenging lives that were not getting solved. So she leaves the medical world to try and get to the root cause. And that kind of brings her into the metabolic health space. And so that's her background and her motivation for writing this book.
Yeah. So what is Good Energy?
Yeah. So the thesis of the book is, and I've kind of written down, my takeaway was, the quality of our life is determined by whether or not our cells have the energy to do their jobs. And that is just largely a function of if they're getting the right food to metabolize and turn into energy. And so it's basically like, if we fuel our cells correctly, life is good.
Right.
And if we
Right.
don't, if we put the wrong gas in the tank, then cells have there's a lot of cellular dysfunction, and that, depending on the type of cell, crops up in different types of diseases. So basically a ton of chronic diseases are linked to metabolic dysfunction in some way or another with different types of cells.
Right. Yeah, and obviously cells are incredibly complicated in the way that all of these processes happen. So we don't need to get into it. She does get into a lot of the science, which is nice.
Yeah.
But also, not super actionable. But it's like, yeah, we get it. There's a problem.
Yeah.
I understand.
Yeah.
But okay, so that's good energy. And now she says that we need more, but we have bad energy. And I guess bad energy is just the opposite of that, which is we are not giving the cells, what we need. And so she does have a kind of holistic approach to good energy, as far as a lot of it is food. A lot of it is also, our sleep, our environment, a lot of other chemicals that we might be subjected to.
Yeah.
Like bad, if you have like makeup or something, or shampoo that could be toxic to you.
Yeah.
And all these different things can come in through our bodies and feed ourselves bad information that makes them act inappropriately and cause a lot of problems.
Right. Like it really just comes down to metabolic health. Like anything that could contribute to your cells creating the right type of energy that they need.
Which is what metabolism basically means.
Metabolism is.
Turning other things into energy.
Yes. And so any disruptor of that, you have bad sleep, that's correlated with cells not being able to do that at the rate that they need to. You don't exercise enough. You eat the wrong food. Now, this is a huge focus on food, is the primary focus, which makes sense because that is the main thing that gets converted into the energy.
It's also probably one of the worst things that's shifted in our environment.
100%. And, the key point here that she makes is that when cells don't get good energy, when they get bad energy, they trigger an immune response, because it's like something's wrong. So bring in the immune cells, and that causes inflammation. The issue is that when it's a fuel issue, there's nothing to fight off. There's no disease. And so inflammation builds up, but it becomes chronic inflammation because it's not going to go away, and the immune response just keeps getting triggered. And this is what leads to chronic disease.
Yeah.
Or a lot of chronic disease.
Yeah. So it's very interesting how it kind of takes a lot of things, I guess, like, diabetes or arthritis even.
Yeah.
And seems things that seem kind of unrelated, and kind of says they all come down to this root cause of the cells are just acting inappropriately.
She does a great job of listing off a very comprehensive list of things that likely have roots in bad energy in some way or another. Now, it's a little unclear of how much of a cause everything could be like brought back to bad energy, but it was shocking how many things in how many different parts of our body, and it makes sense, obviously, come down to or are heavily impacted by the diet that we have.
So now we don't have a lot of chronic inflammation issues, and I don't know if we're really verging on any, but I mean, I think there is still some good quality to have about this. Now, I know you said that you want to have some higher levels of energy, but like, does this seem like a very resonant issue as far as like the improvements that you can make, or does it seem like it's kind of like brings you from we're at this level that really needs attention, and kind of like, will this work for someone who's fairly healthy to begin with?
Yeah, I mean, I personally think the upside, we personally have like been interested in Brian Johnson's blueprint movement because he discloses everything, and he's like the alien who just wants like perfect health, right? And I always wonder, like, what does it feel like to be Brian Johnson? Like, would I just like jump out of bed in the morning?
He does.
It seems like he does. And so I know that, especially with the amount of work we're doing with the podcast, like there's a lot of times where my energy feels really depleted, where I feel like I'm on the verge of being sick or catching a cold, or I feel like I'm not getting the most out of our workouts, or, I'll even get to like days where I'm just not in a great headspace, where my mood is not as high as it could be. And so I'm more curious than anything. Like you said, I don't feel like there's a huge health risk that I feel like I need to solve for right now, but I'm really curious if my baseline state, which I don't feel like is as high as it could be raised a lot by diet.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's you make an interesting point with just like the mood, because I think a lot of this bridges into maybe the last episode where we get into kind of where our thoughts might be coming from.
Yeah.
It's crazy to think that potentially what we eat is causing us to have bad thoughts.
Yeah.
And to have these kind of negative outlook on life. So I'm very curious to see with an improved diet if we find that just eating whole foods and eating all these other things, it's like, wow, the voice of the head is so happy now. It's like it's getting what it wants, and it's like this weird, you wouldn't think that it's your cells are just unhappy and it's translating somehow into some kind of like negativity or pessimism. But it very well could be. So
it very well could be. And the challenge we'll run into is that we are doing other things as well that might affect thoughts and mood. So it's like
meditating.
Like meditating. So we'll have to be honest about that. But we're going to push this as we get to the end of the episode. We're going to explain what our goals with this actually are. And we're going to really push diet and see what happens. Yeah. Yeah. So we mentioned that, society has seemingly taken this downturn in terms of health. But it doesn't feel like us as humans have necessarily changed. So, like, why is everything so bad all of a sudden?
Right. I mean, I think there's a lot of answers to this question. I think it probably came from from a business point of the food industry, right? So it's a lot cheaper for companies to make bad food. Food that is very highly processed, where they can just extract ingredients and fuse them with other things and just basically engineer food that can, one, somehow barely sustain us, and two, is cheap to manufacture because it uses very poorly sourced ingredients, and three, is intentionally addictive.
Yeah.
And so
gets us to eat a lot of it all of the time.
Yes. And they're literally engineered to hijack certain parts of our brain and also not give our cells what they need or to turn on or enable certain hormones, such as like the ones you need for satiation. Right. So that you need more food. Yeah. They've somehow created food that makes you not feel full.
You done it. We said this about phones and we're saying it about food.
It's insane. Yeah. How they've been able to create something that fills and it's like empty. Yeah. So that's crazy. And then it's a lot more accessible, right? Because it's cheaper. It's in grocery stores. It's just packaged up and there's little labels on it. The fact that you can go buy some of this stuff is just diabolical. And then you go to fast food because that's even easier to get. And if you're hungry all the time, it's easy to go get fast food. And that stuff is not going to be very healthy. I mean, even if you go to like somewhere like Chipotle, like they probably don't have organically sourced food. So it's even there's some risk of you're not going to get high quality ingredients. Yeah. And you don't realize what that really looks like what high, I always thought a strawberry is a strawberry. I didn't realize that a strawberry grown organically is a strawberry, or one that's regeneratively grown in like perfect soils of strawberry, and one that's been grown with a bunch of pesticides and gets shipped around the country is only 33% of a strawberry.
Right. Literally has less nutrients. Yeah. And the other side of this, maybe equally or even more insidious side of this, is that these massive food companies are putting millions and millions of dollars into funding studies and programs to counter any health movements and to make it look like their food isn't as bad. I think she said a metric like 90% or so.
I think it was higher than 90%.
Yeah, of studies that are funded by food companies find that the food in question of the study is found not harmful. Right. Which is like, it's just so blatantly like terrible.
Yeah, I think there were some studies that said that Lucky Charms were healthier than eggs.
Right. Or that like a small can of Coke is not a concern for diabetes or something.
Yeah, it's like considered healthy to have a small Coke.
It's like, really?
Like, what are we doing? Come on. It's insane how they get away with this.
Right. It's funny, except when you think about
it is not
what's
funny.
happening, especially in programs that like fund food, like school lunches for kids, and you get like chocolate milk and
and there was I remember learning about this health initiative in school lunches and stuff, and they eventually, because the kids wouldn't want the healthy food, they ended up having to settle on the fact that ketchup could be considered a vegetable for like meeting their dietary needs. And the ketchup's chock full of like sugar and other garbage that is just so unhealthy for you. So it's like,
and that's the other thing is like foods that we would consider potentially healthy companies are just pumping in added sugars. They're changing the ingredients. And so you could eat something that is like, oh, this should be fine. Like a thing of yogurt,
or
maybe.
Oat milk.
Or oat milk. Right. We just
Apparently
learned that.
oat milk sucks.
Yeah. And so it's like, it just creates this like environment where it's like, you don't realize how much money you're up against going in the opposite direction.
Yeah. There's like very, very, very little education on it. You know, it's like go to, you know, eat your vegetables. If I go to Trader Joe's and I go through their frozen vegetables because it's easier to make, pretty much all of it has like added sugar to it and other oils like soybean oil and canola oil and all these other things. That's like, why is it so hard?
Yeah.
It's hard to do.
It's hard.
So the very much easier thing to do
is just buy fast food.
Right.
And it's overwhelming, it's addictive, and it like you're just gonna crave it. And so it's like, of course, that's what's gonna happen to just the US as a whole.
No, and also this industry creates a whole nother industry, which is the health industry, because it basically is killing us.
Yeah, it doesn't stop there.
Right. So the food industry is killing us, right?
Yeah.
And they're making a lot of money off us because we're addicted and we're like coming back for more.
It's great.
And then they're like, oh, we're dying, so we need some health. So thankfully,
welcome big pharma.
Yeah, here comes the pharmaceuticals and the doctors and the surgeons and everyone who's basically just reaping the rewards of your death. Your slow death.
Just misery. And you think about the pharmaceutical companies, and I think it's pretty well known that they fund tons of studies. They're constantly advertising. I think I read something that like 70% of commercials on TV were pharmaceutical companies, like
billions of dollars in like lobbying,
billions of dollars in lobbying and policy. And what she does is she breaks down the distinction between chronic and acute illness, because she says, you know, we have to actually be really happy with the advancements we've made on the acute side of health.
Right.
If you have a health condition where your life is actually threatened and you need a surgery or you need an antibiotic, the US health system is one of the best, if not the best in the world. It's amazing. Now, if you have a chronic condition, we're just going to treat the symptoms. And so what happens is we don't treat the root cause of the problem. And so you take a pill for this, but it doesn't fix the fact that you have a bad diet. And so it crops up somewhere else where there's bad energy. And so then you get a surgery for that. And then you take another medication for this. And we've become an incredibly heavily medicated population, and we're not doing any better.
No. And they're almost intentionally keeping us in a state where it's just cashing in on chronic illness, because if you have someone who has a poor diet and is really struggling and needs these medications and then needs this surgery, the doctors get paid more and the hospitals get more money the more you come in, because the more problems you have.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to say, she says this in the book, you know, doctors get into being doctors because they want to help people.
Right.
But the economic model that they're forced into is full of terrible incentives and puts so much pressure on them to prescribe medication. Even in med school, she talks about the lack of dietary training that they undergo. They talk about how they're not supposed to try and, like, a lot of doctors are pressured. If you're a surgeon, you do surgery. You don't look at underlying reasons for cause, right? And so even if a doctor gets into their field out of really genuine wanting to help people, which most do, they're in a system that is designed by people who just want profit.
Right. To give a kind of specific example on this. So my mom is actually a doctor, and she was in the weight management industry, field. And she had a very kind of psychological approach with a lot of her patients. You know, she'd really work with them to try to figure out what the root cause. You know, she wasn't just a dietitian; she was a doctor, so she could do the doctor thing.
Right.
But she was.
We'll leave that to her.
Right. You know, she knows what she does. But basically, then her hospital that she was a part of got bought by a big company that is like a for-profit hospital.
Yeah.
And they brought in RVUs, which they brought up in this book, which is basically your relative value unit, which is a kind of metric to measure how good a doctor's doing at basically prescribing pills and just generating money for the hospital. So the higher that is, and it's crazy because none of the metrics of what determines a high RVU has to do with the patient's well-being.
Yeah,
it's
no treatment outcomes.
Yeah, not at all about outcomes. And so basically, they, came in and my mom was doing her thing, trying to help people get better. And basically she had to come into this meeting where they're like, she's like, well, the way we see it with the RVs and everything is like, we view it as a gas tank. And if you're, doing well, you're like a full. And then they're like, you're like on empty. So my mom was like, this is ridiculous. She ended up like leaving shortly after all this was going on because like, this is clearly just the worst. And, for-profit hospitals should not even exist. That's a terrible thing.
Yeah.
And so it's crazy that the industry has come to this. But a lot of doctors want their jobs. So they have to do it.
And they probably, you just went to medical school and residency for an undergrad for 12 years or whatever. Yeah. And it's like, gonna be a tough to bite the bullet on. I'm gonna try and do things a different way at that point. And, that's a great example because it's like, something you can verify as true.
Yeah, but I have more about that.
I was just gonna say she brought up one in the book where like the surgeon philosophy was like, if they come into this hospital, they're getting a surgery whether they need it or
whether
not.
Or not something's wrong, they're getting a surgery.
And again, this is not to criticize the advancements we've made in health for acute treatment. Like there are some brilliant things that are going on that are making people's lives better.
Right.
But when you have a chronic illness and you treat symptoms, that is like the most profitable case in the world because people keep coming back for the medication and the pharma companies who really don't have our best interests at heart are going to design things to just keep people
back. Yeah. And another example that my mom had was she was, dealing with patients. A lot of times they would go to surgery because it was a great way to help them, lose a lot of weight.
Yeah.
But, a lot of times her patients would come back and be like, the surgeons told me, I'm cured. My mom was like, no,
nope.
We fixed a symptom, we fixed a lot of the weight that you had, but there's clearly like some root cause here. And I think a lot of people have kind of, I don't know a ton about this, but with like the Ozempic.
The GLP-1s, it's like
this huge movement where it's like, oh, everyone thinks they're cured. As soon as you stop, problem's back.
Comes back. Or even if you think about it from the bad energy lens, you've solved this weight problem, which is awesome that we can solve that because just being overweight alone is a comorbidity for so many other things.
Right.
So it does make you just live longer and be healthier. But if you're still not getting the right nutrients, you're probably going to have other chronic issues pop up over time or be at risk for other diseases.
Yeah.
And so again, it's like, A, the pharma companies are profiting, and then B, fast food still gets to pump their product. And it's like, we're not changing the underlying issue here.
Yeah. Now, she does give us a hopeful lens on this, which is that there is some new disruptors. And those disruptors are kind of the health wearables that we have access to and the ability to get like independent lab testing.
Yeah.
Because these are things that we did not used to have in the past where, you'd go and your doctor's like, oh, we looked at your lab results, you're fine. And she's like, she basically talks about how a lot of the acceptable ranges for most of our lab tests are like just not great and that they could be better. And so, and a lot of other issues, such as a lot of people really overestimate the amount of sleep they get. We both had a huge, rude awakening when we got our Whoops, which are great at tracking sleep. And we were like, whoa.
I mean, you're awake 45 minutes in the night that you never count.
Right.
And so that alone, you take 20 minutes extra to fall asleep than you thought.
Yeah.
You might, bang, suddenly it could be an hour plus chunk off of what you thought you were getting from sleep.
Yes. And so there's similar things like with, dieting, and you don't realize that the food that you're taking in is having such a drastic impact on you. But now with a lot of better health wearables and the ability to get our stuff tested, we can come in and kind of be our own doctors in a sense. Cause she's like, you don't really need doctors if you're healthy. You only really need them if something's like acutely wrong, right?
Yes.
You get bit by a snake that's venomous, right? Go to the hospital.
Yeah.
If you're in an accident or something, those are obviously times. Go to the hospital. And if you're experiencing some very drastic symptoms, like you do need to get them treated, but 100%. Know that that's not gonna just fix everything.
Yeah. I heard an analogy. I don't know where I heard this, but it's like because of the environment that we've created, it's as if people are drowning in a river and doctors are pulling them out, but they're not getting to the person who's pushing people into the river upstream.
Right.
And so people are just going to get right. And it's like, ideally, we could stop that person from pushing them into the river, but there's so many people drowning that we need to just be pulling them out. And so we just need to treat the symptom, not the cause. And the worse it gets, the more that happens. But like you said, the disruptors are a way for us to take a little bit more health accountability.
Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, that doesn't change the environment we're in. And hopefully more work continues to be done to increase education and not allow for a system like this.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, the new levels of education and the new control we have in our personal lives gives us a lot of fuel to make positive changes.
Yeah, and I will say another challenge with the health wearables is that we have to be very proactive in our approach. And that means that you have to pay the money up front. And that's not always the fun thing to do, because you have to spend money on health wearables, on lab tests, on just better groceries, and all of these things that you don't realize will cost you later if you kind of ignore them. She says you're going to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on medical bills if you're careless with your health. So might as well prevent that.
And if we're being honest, the Whoop was like $300.
Right.
We're going to talk about, to get a really in-depth measurement on this challenge, we just got our blood work done, like a complete panel done, so that we can get into our results. That was another $300. That's not really affordable for a lot of people, or is never going to be the priority. And so at the end of the day, it's like, for most people, like, hopefully more education and more resources can go into, this is how you can, build a diet affordably, or because
that's why we're here.
That's why we're here, is because hopefully we can, give some of that information, because otherwise the fast food company who's trying to make the cheapest, most addictive product is always going to win.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I don't think everyone needs to get a blood test. I know, we were even a little resistant, but we're like, you know what, let's sit here, do it, see what actually works, so that hopefully we should never have to do it again.
So we've broken down, this issue with acute versus chronic health, and how diet is obviously crucially important.
How the world's out to get us.
The world's out to get us. But that is not the sole problem. And she gets into some of the other problems in the book.
Yeah. And so it turns out the world is out to get us in a lot more ways than we realized. So some examples. We're sitting down too much. And that's just how modern work is. And this is for kids as well as adults. Schools, work, we're sitting down way, 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 way too much. And there's some very interesting studies about how people who basically were jogging for like 3 minutes every 30 minutes, which is kind of a lot of time to jog, versus people who were jogging for like 20 minutes every couple hours, or like for 60 minutes a day. Everyone ran an hour a day.
Yeah.
But the people who had run every 30 minutes had drastically better improvements in their health over time, which is very interesting. We're victims of this, where we go and do our weightlifting session and then sit for the entire rest of the day.
For like the next 15 hours. I will say, after reading this book, the standing desk went up. So that's a good thing.
There you go.
Because I was getting a little scared when it was like, that's a pillar. We talked about sleep.
And sleep, there's a lot of problems with sleep.
Tons of problems.
Lights suck.
And the fact that you're sitting at a desk inside, you're not getting, sunlight.
Yeah.
Phones. What else? There was, exercise. I mean, we don't exercise enough as people typically.
Yeah, I mean, people used to be getting 20,000 steps a day. We were very active creatures. We weren't meant to just sit. And there's some interesting stats on dogs who are, kept inside all day are like 70% more likely to be depressed or something like that.
Which is crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and basically there's a ton of health issues, and we're trying to approach these. But this is the morbid outlook. There is the positive outlook, which is, as you make these changes and as you have these identity shifts, things snowball. And so what a small change could be today in diet or in sleep or in exercise stack on each other, and then you can get addicted to that good feeling of feeling good all the time.
Yeah. No, it's definitely, one thing at a time. And that's something that this book, I don't think, does a great job at kind of approaching. It seems like there's almost this all or nothing approach. Yeah. So maybe now can be a good time where we kind of talk a little bit about some of the things that didn't quite sit well with us in the book.
Yeah. So like you were saying, this all or nothing approach in the book, she spells out like what foods you should be eating and what foods you should be avoiding. And there's very little relative truth here. So she doesn't just say, McDonald's is the worst and broccoli is the best and white rice fits in somewhere in the middle. It's like the category of good energy and the category of bad energy. So drinking oat milk sounds as bad as eating an Oreo. And to me, that was just like, A, not super feasible for the average person, and B, just like not true. Like things are worse than other things. And I get that things can be not optimal. And if you can't avoid white rice or oat milk or whatever, that's great. But
and even with the oat milk thing, it's like when she mentions oat milk in this like bad energy lens, it seems like and she'll like mention these brands of like Silk or for almond milk or like Oatly, and it's like, okay, well, hold on. They make stuff that's, unsweet. So it's like, why is this in bad energy? And when I look at the ingredients, they're like, this seems to kind of fit in with more or less some of the things that she's like looking at. It's like organic, unsweetened almond milk. Like, I don't understand. And so it seems like a lot of things were getting lumped in with bad energy when they had almost like a alternative to it. So like there are types of oat milk or almond milks that you can drink that aren't bad energy, but it's more of like just says almond milk and then names a brand that has a bad almond milk.
Yeah, and it's a great point. I think, one of the second critiques that I had was, this episode, which has been kind of everything is against us, is kind of a reflection of this book, which really comes at it from a lens of a little bit of fear mongering in the sense of, it feels like you're going to die tomorrow when you eat poorly. But after reading this,
I mean, there's literally stats that she cites in the books where it's like these kind of numbers of this study followed this many people and it found out that there was a 20% higher mortality rate, when it's like, that seems like a really scary number. But when you think about what the mortality rate in general was, and then a 20% increase of that. And I guess that was another thing that we've talked about, is these kind of percent relative conditional things. Yeah. And how those can be very misleading.
Like, I get the health crisis in the US is urgent, 100%. But I still want as objective as a view on it as possible. And like you were saying, basically how she presents most information is saying, eating this food or sleeping this amount or, having things in plastic containers is associated with these massive percentage increases in mortality or in obesity or whatever it is. Right. Now, like you were saying, from what my head went to is like, okay, for an example, just imagine something has a 1 in 1,000 chance of mortality, and then you do X behavior and it increases to 2 in 1,000. That's 100% increase. That sounds terrifying. Right. It sounds like I should never do that thing in my life. Right. On net, the risk is still incredibly low. And she doesn't caveat with that. And I think it's important because otherwise, to me, it comes across as, A, I should either go double check this thing because I don't feel like I'm getting as unbiased as a picture as possible, or B, I'm, cherry picking what makes my case look the strongest. Right. And I don't appreciate that.
She talks about our triglyceride levels and how when the like optimal level versus what the doctors say is okay. And she's like, this is clearly showing some problem here because, if 80 is what's optimal, but she's like, even if you go to 100, there's a 50% higher chance that you're going to have like a heart attack. I'm like, okay, for someone at a 100 level, their chance of a heart attack might be 50% higher, but the person at 80's chance of a heart attack is probably so minuscule that it's like a 50% higher chance is like just a little bit better. And it sounds like, oh my God, I'm 1.5 times more likely to experience this. But, the actual unhealthy range, which is, above the 150. And when you really have a problem, it was like over 300. And that's like where you get into like the drastic problem. So it was a little, I guess, made it, not harder to trust, but a little more like this seems to be making a very black and white picture out of something that's a lot more nuanced, as a lot of health is, and that there's a lot of inflexibility with kind of just food in general and also what, living is.
And again, she's waging the war on big pharma and big food and ultra processed foods. And so again, it comes back to there is so much truth in how bad this problem is. And I would not, just because we have that problem, it doesn't discount the greater problem at scale.
Right.
But it just felt slightly unnecessary.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's percentages that do matter, such as 70% of the population's overweight. That's a good percentage to know. But I guess another kind of critique I would have is similar to the only good energy things and bad energy things. And we're saying we wish there's kind of some metric scale here, because she seems to lump a lot of things that we were unexpected, such as white rice, into this like don't eat white rice category. Yeah. It's like I thought people were doing great in Japan where they eat a lot of white rice, right? And so that, is jarring. If I was someone who was eating very unhealthy all of the time, and then I would read this book, I might be thinking that is a monumental shift of everything. And it's like, is there some point at which we should get met in the middle here?
Yes.
And it doesn't, I don't feel like that really came across. And I don't know. Okay. Here's another important thing. We didn't finish the whole book. We read the first 2 parts because
we're about like 70% of the way done. Because
the next 2 parts get into the kind of actionable steps, and that's what we're going to be covering in the next episode.
Yeah.
So maybe this is going to be in poor taste here, because maybe in the next step there's a lot better meet in the middle approach.
True.
But I do feel that so far it's been just kind of like a very damning approach of everything you're doing is wrong and you're going to die because of it, and you have to drastically change everything as soon as you can.
Yeah, and this goes back to, sometimes I feel like when we read a book like this, the expert in their field likes to find why their field is kind of the cause of everything. Mm-hmm. And so, whether it's meditation, Michael Singer says, if you just let go of everything, you have no problems anymore. Mm-hmm. It's like solves everything. Well, it doesn't maybe solve the health problems that you're dealing with. It doesn't, right? Mm-hmm. All these things. Mm-hmm. This, it might not solve the screen time addiction or, loneliness or sleep deprivation. Yeah. And, we read Why We Sleep a while ago, which I'm sure we'll get into in a future series. That felt like this is the reason for everything.
Your poor sleep is the root cause of all evil in life, and you need to fix that.
And so I appreciate Nuance, because whenever I hear really strong generalizable statements, my brain goes to, that's probably not telling the whole story. Mm-hmm. Now, that doesn't mean it's wrong, and it doesn't mean it's not true, and it doesn't mean we're not going to use it to really guide what we do, because I think most of it is grounded in science and it's really valuable. But I actually just would feel like it's a stronger argument if I knew the bases were covered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think she has a little section towards the end of where we got, where it's this kind of like let's cover the bases and really think about what else there is to it. Now, this section was nice. It was cool to see all the other things she threw in there, but she threw a lot of things in there and got weirdly deep into some of them. And so, for example, she actually recommends to read The Untethered Soul.
Yes.
Let's go watch episode 6, where we cover that, recommend. But it was interesting to all of a sudden have this kind of, okay, we've been talking about food this whole time and all these problems and how we're going to fix it. Now, you also need to exercise for like 3 hours a week, walk 10,000 steps a day, get enough sleep, get off your phones.
And I will say, because, I said, I like when the bases are covered. Mm-hmm. Specifically, she says, like, these are all forms of good energy.
Right.
And so what I meant is, like, I don't like lumping everything into that one problem. It's like deep work did the same thing, where deep work is a successful means for being productive, but then other forms of success he kind of tried to fit under deep work as like, this is also deep work. And it's like, is it? And like,
this sure is like not what you just defined deep work.
The first 70% of the book focuses on metabolic health specifically, and then she gives this, like you said, this long list of mindfulness and, it could be psilocybin treatment therapy, right? And it's like, this is all good energy. And I'm like, well, now you're just saying good things.
Right.
So I'm like,
it's like, what it really is good energy. I thought it was just that your cells are happy, not that you're doing yoga.
That not everything is metabolic health. That doesn't mean it's not crucially important to the puzzle.
Right. So it seems to be kind of all of a sudden this section at the end where she's like, all right, let's just cover all the bases of fixing you as a person.
Yeah. And
all these things that you should be doing, which, we agree with pretty much most of the things she listed in there, as far as it's like, those are obvious. She mentions, the the mindful meditation. We're doing that. She mentions digital detox. We're doing that.
Yeah.
And then, sleep, which we're going to do. So there's a lot of things.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, this is.
Yeah. And I think it's a fair distinction because I'd say most of our critiques are a critique about presentation, not about content.
Yes.
And so coming away from this book, I say I agree with pretty much all of it.
Mm-hmm.
I just would have liked some different styles of presentation. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't really change how it's still a very beneficial book to read, and the information is still really important.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I have one final thing that was a little presented weird to me. Okay. And this was when we got into, she mentions alcohol a couple times. And when she mentions alcohol, it's kind of in this like don't do it a lot. It's, can be bad for you if you do it in excess and can have some bad impacts on your sleep. And she does have a section where she kind of lists some more specific consequences of it.
Yeah.
But then there's kind of a list of like, oh, well, have one drink or make sure your wine's organic or all these other things. And we're like, okay, whoa.
Yeah.
You just said that I shouldn't even like eat brown rice because that's too unhealthy. And then it's like,
but now I can get an organic cocktail.
Right.
Yeah.
Then I'm like, surely alcohol has some pretty negative impacts on our metabolic health and our cells' well-being. Like, surely that's bad energy. And that's not listed anywhere in the book under the bad energy category.
It was strange more than anything else. Mm-hmm. Like, why did we not draw the line there too?
Right. Like, surely that should be just like a listed chunked under her whole. Yeah. She listed like 1,000 things in bad energy. And in beverages, alcohol was not one of the beverages.
Right.
Oat milk was.
Right.
But
now maybe. Yeah, I don't know.
Loco wasn't on there. Surely that's bad energy.
It cannot be good energy.
That's got to be the worst.
You read that section, you're like, okay, so we can drink 4 Locos.
Right. No, but I mean, they're obviously ruled out by her metrics, but it's just odd that it doesn't show up in a list when she does list.
Now, all that said, do you recommend the book for someone who wants to get into the diet space or just wants to learn more about the foods that they're eating?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does a good job at really making you feel like there's a problem. Make me want to get up and start walking around.
It's a good motivating book.
Yes, I agree. And I think it makes a very complicated set of problems seem very simple, which is nice because I think ultimately I agree with her that probably the root cause of most of these problems is because we're fueling our bodies wrong and we're treating our bodies wrong. And I agree with that. So I think it's a resonant book and it does make it seem hopeful amongst all of the fear mongering that kind of occurs throughout it. But if that's what it takes to really motivate you, which I think it does for us to some extent, then I think it's a good read. And I think I'm really excited to get into the diet part because that should be even better as far as having an actual action plan to go along with, okay, now we've just learned all of the bad.
Yes.
And why we need to make a change and why good energy is important.
Yes. And so that's a perfect transition for what to look forward to in these next few episodes because we've read part 1 and 2. Part 3 is like the practical diet guide. Mm-hmm. So we're going to be pulling a ton of resources. We're going to be crafting a food list of like the do not eats, the green means go, and just making this off the top of my head.
Whatever.
And just like, we're going to have a pretty comprehensive list of what we are going to eat and not eat. Mm-hmm. We're going to craft some recipes. We're going to figure out where we're going to buy this stuff, how much, what the quality of the ingredients are. We're going to try and make all that information as readily accessible as possible. And what we mentioned earlier is we just did the function blood test, which is like 160 plus biomarkers, not out of necessity because it's $300 something and you probably don't need to do that.
Yeah.
But it will give us a really good outlook on what changes over time when we go to a follow-up appointment in 3 to 6 months and we see how did our blood markers change on this diet so that we can come back on this podcast and give a really in-depth report on what we're eating and how it impacted us.
Yeah, so we're probably going to take most of our inspiration from the book. We might pull on some outside sources, maybe some Brian Johnson type meals get thrown in here just because he seems to have it figured out. And it's cool because a lot of his stuff kind of aligns. And it's cool because this book doesn't, say you have to eat one specific diet. So we can kind of come in and build our own with what we've learned and try to make it sensible diet, just using kind of our own what we know as far as like calorically, what we should be eating, what's worked for us in the past. So just to try to build this and then, try to make it accessible. And it's just going to take a lot of effort to do.
Yes.
And especially to compile everything and figure out the costs of everything and where we're getting it from.
Yeah.
Never been shopping at a farmer's market, but
here we go. Yeah, so also next episode, we'll get maybe a little more granular with some of the specific recommendations on, what it means to eat like organic versus not organic, your water quality, like really the practical guide. And we'll be building the learning to live diet that we'll get to experiment with and building the challenge. So if you want to know what those details are, that's next week.
Yeah. So as we conclude our conversation here, what would you say your biggest takeaway is on this book so far?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest point I felt like she made again and again was metabolic dysfunction is the cause of chronic illness across the body. It's not just the food related things that we think of. It's not just being overweight. It can be things like Alzheimer's. It can be things like you said arthritis earlier. Like she gives this massive list. And so it really impresses upon me like how important the food we eat is and how miseducated we are as a population. Because so much of what she said I had never even thought of. I drink tap water all the time.
Right.
I don't know if that's going to change tomorrow, but it makes me be like, maybe I shouldn't, right? And so that alongside of just really getting a deeper understanding of how bad the environment is for our like setup was kind of like the two main things and big motivators.
Yeah. It is a little grim when we think about how unsuitable our world is for human beings today. But I think that's why a big part of why we're sitting down here right now is because we're kind of feeling this on a deep level. And this is this undescribable feeling of that we don't really belong in the world anymore as it is. And I think this, not in like a crazy sense, but it's just in this weird, like, back of our minds that something's wrong here. So this is a big part of the puzzle. So it'll be a lot of fun to figure out.
Yeah.
So definitely check out the book. And then for next week, tune in as we dive into the diet.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for listening. Looking forward to next week. If you liked it, tell us if you have any recommendations for the diet.
Yeah.
Or, anything you've experienced in the past that would be helpful.
Yeah. All right. So we will see you next week.
See you next week.